Here's what's coming today on the Woodworking Network podcast.
Well, I can tell you, we have got one of the best stories for a particular commodity than I've ever been made aware of personally. This industry can claim to have always been carbon negative.
Welcome to the fourth season of the Woodworking Network podcast and a new episode. Join us as we explore the business of woodworking, big and small, and what it takes to succeed. I'm Will Sampson. Today's episode is sponsored by the Executive Briefing Conference. Today our guest is Andy O'Hare, president of the Composite Panel Association. He has some fascinating facts and statistics to share that might change popular views about the environmental impact of wood products. But first, I want to talk about, are you telling your story? Years ago, a friend who was running a custom cabinet shop in a small town told me a story of a somewhat embarrassing social gathering he had had with friends. He and his wife and a few other couples would get together at each other's houses on a regular basis for a social evening of dinner, drinks, and maybe a few hands of poker. At one such gathering, the hostess was excitedly ushering everyone in to see her newly remodeled bathroom, featuring all new custom cabinets. But my friend hadn't made the cabinets. They came from some shop out of the area. Now, my friend just shrugged it off as a minor lost job, but his wife was not going to let it go. She confronted the hostess and asked, "Do you know what my husband does for a living?" And the hostess was completely embarrassed to find out that he built custom cabinets and would have been happy to bid on their job if they had approached him. You see, my friend, the custom cabinet shop owner, had not told his own story to his friends. If you don't tell your story, no one will know it. In business parlance, this is often given some slick title and an acronym, such as your unique selling proposition, or USP for short. In a nutshell, it's what sets you apart and makes you different in a positive way from your competition. But if you use the business term, there's a danger you'll think of it too much like a sales pitch. You'll start adding in competitive language. I think it's better if you just tell the story of your business and let that tale set you apart by leaving a lasting impression in people's minds. Maybe your story is how you started in a garage and built up the business into a thriving professional enterprise that serves discriminating clients. Maybe your story is how you have sustained and grown the business started by your father or grandfather. Maybe your story is how you developed a singular way of doing something and crafting that product in a way that makes it special and in demand. Or just maybe you built your business on a legacy of outstanding customer service that helped build your business by word of mouth. Whatever it is, your story is yours to tell. But you do have to tell it. And you have to be comfortable, maybe even proud to tell it over and over again, so everyone you come in contact with knows at least a significant piece of that story. If you make it memorable and worth sharing, your listeners will help you spread the word without your even asking them. This is why social media is so powerful. It's not about business competition so much as it is about telling and sharing stories. Stories that are memorable, entertaining, and fun to share. What's your story? I want to get to our interview with Andy O'Hare, but first let's pause for a word from our sponsor. It's really easy for woodworkers to stay stuck inside, focused on their shops and production. But over the last couple of years, the pandemic has forced them to be even more isolated than usual. And it's even harder if what you want is to network with the top-level executives in the industry. Where and how can you do that? The answer is the Executive Briefing Conference coming this September at the spectacular Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. This is an unparalleled opportunity to boost your business with intelligence on techniques, tools, and technology, and to feed on inspiration from real leaders in the industry. Not to mention take in all the high-altitude hospitality, beauty, and recreation offered by the Broadmoor. Learn more at executivebriefingconference.com. See you there. Now let's get to our interview with Andy O'Hare.
Hello, welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast. We are live today from AWFS Fair in Las Vegas. Today my guest is Andy O'Hare, president of the Composite Panel Association. Welcome to the Woodworking Network podcast, Andy.
Great to be here, Will.
Well, I want to talk about some commonly held misconceptions about some wood products, especially in regard to their environmental impact in relation to climate change. But first, let's get a little background on your association and your background. Can you tell us about the CPA?
Sure. So thanks, Will. So the CPA has been in existence for about 60 years. It got started as the National Particle Board Association when particle board was the only composite wood product that was produced at the time. Since then, the portfolio of composite wood products has expanded beyond particle board to include medium density fiberboard and others. And the association itself has grown beyond America to include Canada and Mexico. So we are now officially a North American association. And by way of background for myself, I'm an association executive, and I've been an association executive for about 35 years. I've represented a number of different industries during that time frame, including the oil and gas industry, the cement industry, the fertilizer industry. But one of the central themes of my advocacy, I'm also a registered lobbyist, has been on very technical issues, environmental issues, health and safety issues, energy issues that have benefited from my scientific background. So I've got a degree in chemistry and another degree in geology, which I've been able to apply that scientific knowledge to the benefit of all the industries I've worked for the past 35 years.
I imagine that sets you apart from the average Joe that's beating on the doors in Congress and trying to explain something, who is just an advocate for an organization but doesn't have the scientific and technical background to have some credibility in making the argument.
Yeah, you're so right, Will. So when someone walks into the door into an office of a member of Congress and can credibly explain a piece of policy work with scientific knowledge as their background, they're going to secure wins on behalf of their constituency. And I've got a number of such wins over my career.
Well, that's great. Where do composite panels fit into the picture when it comes to concerns about carbon footprint?
Well, I can tell you we have got one of the best stories for a particular commodity than I've ever been made aware of personally. This industry can claim to have always been carbon negative.
Interesting.
So composite panels have always stored excess amounts of carbon beyond the amount they emit when they're manufactured.
Wow, so the people that are all worried about cutting down trees and all this kind of stuff, when it comes to composite panels, they really don't have a case.
Well, they can definitely take credit from the fact that we use fiber. So number one, we're also the most incredible recyclers. So we take fiber that would otherwise be burned or decompose on the forest
Or put into a landfill.
And we mix that fiber with a small amount of resin and press it into panels that are then used to make very long-lasting wood products, furniture, cabinets, flooring. And that carbon that is present in the panels and then present in the products that are used, that use those panels, is storing that carbon for 50 to 100 years.
And it can't be released into the atmosphere to increase climate change.
It can't be. So it's bottled up. And then a good percentage of these wood products are recycled and reused once they reach the end of their initial useful life. And then if they are no longer useful, oftentimes they'll either be burned for energy recovery or find themselves into a landfill. And landfilling is the place of last resort. However,
That's still storing carbon.
so when you landfill something, you're sticking it into a device that doesn't have any active oxygen decomposition. This is a scientist in me coming out. And so a wood product that's disposed of in a landfill is essentially going to remain intact for hundreds of years.
Well, that's kind of equivalent to a tree falling down in the forest and decomposing on the forest floor.
It's similar, although you're going to release the the CO2 from that circumstance, whereas by sticking a piece, a wood product that's past its useful life into a landfill, that carbon is going to stay intact in that piece of wood for hundreds of years.
Wow. So how much carbon storage can be attributed to these products over their lifespan? I mean, what kind of a contribution are we making here?
It's really an impressive story. So in my tenure, which hasn't been very long with the Composite Panel Association, one of the first key initiatives that I undertook was to answer that question. So how much carbon are we actually storing? And to do so looking back at the last 20 years or so. So I worked with a third-party researcher to determine in an aggregate basis over the course of the last 25 years how much carbon we've stored in composite panels. And the number was just eye-popping. We have stored over 350 million metric tons of carbon.
Wow.
Just in the wood panels, not including all the carbon that's in the cabinets and the furniture in addition to the panels that are ingredients in those products. So 350 million metric tons doesn't really mean anything to the average person. What it actually is the equivalent amount of emissions of CO2 from every car in the US on an annual basis.
Oh my goodness.
Every single car on an annual basis. So
that's significant.
That carbon then is offsetting emissions that would otherwise take place from other entities in the economy.
And you mentioned earlier that the product is carbon neutral, meaning that the amount of carbon created and released in its manufacture is offset by the carbon that it stores.
Yes, and actually it's more. It's 2 to 1.
2 to 1.
It's more than 2 to 1. And as I indicated earlier, that carbon is locked up arguably forever, even if you go to the landfill story, because that carbon is not going to be released in any near term.
Wow, that is a compelling
So if you
story.
reduce it to an annual figure, just from the production of particle board and medium density fiberboard, we are storing over 14 million metric tons a year. And that carbon store is then being added to every single year. Every single year.
Wow.
So it's very significant.
Well, I don't think the general public has, I think that there are huge misconceptions about wood products. And, everybody talks about saving trees and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think they understand that or know that story. What are you doing to get that out there?
Yeah, you are so correct, Will. I think the general public essentially understands that trees absorb CO2 through photosynthesis to grow the tree. However, they have no understanding of the relationship between the utility of a tree to make wood products and how that carbon is then stored in the wood products. So wood is 50% carbon by mass. And so you can easily do the math to determine how much carbon is being stored in a given piece of wood product.
It's something you can heft.
You can. So, but you're right in that the message is not getting out to the general public. And we, as an association, working independently as CPA and with some of our partners, our partner associations, are trying to do a better job of communicating that story to the general public. So we're making use of social media, be it LinkedIn or Instagram or other means, to get out short messages to those that will listen and convey some of these very simple statistics that I just shared with you. So in other words, that we can store 14.5 million metric tons of carbon a year. And we produced the first in a series of videos that we're going to be pushing out on social media in that regard for the rest of 2023.
Well, that's great, and because it seems to me that the public is not getting this story and not understanding it, and they're talking about things that are less tangible than the composite wood products that you're talking about. It should be easy to understand, but it's a message that just isn't getting out there.
So there are three audiences that are in our crosshairs, and that includes the general public, which you just mentioned, architects and designers, so those that actually specify the use of materials for construction, and then third, which is an audience that's not often talked about in this particular context, is those that fund construction.
Ah, okay.
So bankers, private equity funds, builders. Those three audiences are increasingly coming under pressure, whether it's through environmental, social and governance initiatives, through shareholder initiatives, or otherwise, to convey the environmental impacts of their investments. And so those entities are going to be increasingly looking to specifiers, in this case architects and designers, to provide them with the carbon story of the structures they're building.
Okay.
So it's sort of it will eventually have a ripple effect. So the designers and the architects are going to have to finally understand this story and make it their own, so they can then explain that articulately and accurately to their customers, who are the bankers, the builders, and the private equity funds. So that third universe of entities, the bankers, the private equity funds, and the builders, are going to increasingly be a target audience for my association and others that work to communicate this carbon story, because they are under pressure from many different constituencies to be able to convey the benefits, the carbon benefits of the structures they're building.
Well, and I think that in the past, when they've thought about environmental issues in relation to most building products, they're thinking of a shorter lifespan and a shorter life cycle, and they're maybe ignoring a part of the life cycle, like the end use and ultimate destruction or discarding of these products, and not figuring that in. And even that part of the story with composite panel products seems to be much more environmentally sound than other materials.
I think that the best way to summarize the carbon story for composite panels, and this works similarly for other wood products, is that we, looking at the environmental footprint of composite panels from cradle to grave, so from the forest all the way to the landfill, what we're essentially doing is completing the carbon cycle. Most people, when they went to grade school science in 7th and 8th grade, they were taught about the carbon cycle, which looks at the fate of a tree from its origins to its ultimate fate. So we are taking fiber from a tree, converting it into a composite wood panel, which is then used for 50 to 100 or more years, and then it may end up in the landfill where it's then stored and made available for future use. Indefinitely. So this is like a carbon dew loop that we are a part of, which very few people understand. And we need to do a much better job of conveying this circular carbon cycle story to decision makers, whether that's architects and designers, bankers and private equity funds, and ultimately the general public. Now, the challenge, which you're a journalist you know even better than I, getting a message comprehended by the general public costs a fortune. And it needs to be sustained over many, 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 many years. And this industry by itself does not have the resources to be able to educate the general public.
All by itself, right.
So we are going to have to partner with other constituencies, the building community, others, and start first with those that are making these building material choices today.
Well, you need allies to help tell the story. I mean, in the Woodworking Network, our primary audience is fabricators and manufacturers of wood-based products. What can you suggest to them to help tell the story? What can give them something that they can educate their customers to feel better about using these kinds of products?
Yes. So we've been working on tools through the Composite Panel Association, and you can access most of them through our website very readily to simplify this carbon story. And that example I gave you earlier of that two-minute video that we prepared to begin communicating this story is going to be posted on our website. So it's those kinds of stories. And I think the most important medium today is video.
Yes.
And making those videos available through widely dispersed social media platforms. But that's a technique and a tactic. I think more importantly, for those of us in the wood industry, we need to be more vocal, more aggressive in communicating the carbon benefits of this material.
Not acting like we're coming from a position of weakness that we have to make excuses for what we do. In fact, we should be proud of what we're doing.
Most certainly. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked for a number of different industries over my professional career, including being a lobbyist for the cement and concrete industry. So cement and concrete, they are wonderful materials, but they have a very bad carbon footprint. And we, as a wood-based industry, need to get out in front and not be shy about communicating our message. And so we need to arm ourselves collectively across the whole wood spectrum with a small, simple set of arguments and stories that tell this to the general public.
That's
and
great.
Get it out there, and get it out there, and get it out there, because it's going to have to be a sustained campaign for many years. We ought to
have, and maybe you're already developing this, some little cheat sheet or whatever that can be distributed to every custom cabinet shop and any fabricator and architects and designers that they can have and maybe even hand out to their customers so that they understand what this is and they have the numbers there and it's easy.
Yes, sir. And that is certainly on our to-do list through my association. But again, it's got to be done in concert with many other facets of the wood supply chain.
I definitely can sympathize with the difficulty of such a massive education project, but that's what it takes, is the massive education of everybody.
It does.
And it's tough, but there are people that talk about greenwashing and people that come up with skewed stories to try and prove that they're environmentally responsible, and this is not one of those. This is a story where the numbers are there and the math is there and the science is there, but the public hasn't been let in on it yet.
They have not. So the time is now. And if we're going to tackle climate change thoughtfully and constructively, wood products have to be one of the prominent solutions. And that message has to be conveyed more clearly and more thoughtfully, more diligently, and repetitively.
Well, that's great, Andy, and I appreciate you spending time with us today, and we'll probably talk more about this ongoing so we can help you get that educational message out there. But thanks for being on the Woodworking Network podcast.
Thank you so much, Will. It's been my pleasure.
That's it for today. If you're looking for more of our podcasts, you can find all of them at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcasts and in popular podcast channels. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks again to today's sponsor, the Executive Briefing Conference. If you have a comment or topic you'd like us to explore, contact me at will.sampson@woodworkingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening.